Hey everyone, this is Saul from Three Kingdoms Games, coming to you today with some deck archetypes. I just talked about player archetypes in my last Magic related video, and a lot of people didn't seem to realize those things, so I'm hoping maybe the same thing will come with this, or worst case, I get the right decks in the right players' hands and more people are having fun. So, yay. The four major deck archetypes when we're talking about Magic the Gathering, though this does apply to a lot of games, is Control, Aggro, Combo, and mid-range. For control decks, you're trying to do incremental exchanges that are in your favor to destabilize your opponent's deck. A lot of big words there. What I mean by this is what you're doing is you're trying to use low-cost counterspells or one-card removals to remove more of their creatures or counter higher CMC things. So a counterspell, which costs 2, if you can stop a 3 or more cost creature or effect that you don't want to deal with, you just came out ahead. Or if you play a board wipe, so something like a Wrath of God, a Damnation, a Sweltering Sun, an Anger of the Gods, those are the kind of effects where if you can remove 2 or more creatures, you're 2 for winning. It's great. You now have card advantage, most likely. You've possibly destabilized people. So through these incremental exchanges that you come out on top of, you progressively will win the game because there's an inevitability that will happen if they can't recover. So some of the major decks that you will see in Control are Mono Blue. This is like the original granddaddy of control decks. You are a reactive control deck. You use counter spells like Counterspell, Mana Leak, Force of Will, things like that to stop your opponent from playing stuff that you don't want to deal with and hopefully destabilizing them. So for your combo decks, if you know what combo they're playing, you hit the right piece at the right time, they can't win. Aggro decks, you stop them long enough, they run out of gas, you now can pull ahead. You also will use bounce effects in blue decks to gain tempo. When I'm talking about tempo, I'm talking about the speed the game is going at. If you are bouncing things back to their hand, you are now slowing down the game. By slowing down the game to your speed, you're taking away what makes aggro decks strong. Now, control decks are a lot of fun. You'll generally have more card draw than most people. You'll have better tempo than most people. But you also will run into certain issues where, for instance, if you run into a really fast deck, they get under you. What I mean by getting under you, before you've set up to be able to do stuff, they're already hitting you faster than you can deal with. This happens, there's not a lot you can do. But you also have the other huge downside to control decks is generally to play them well, you have to know what the other person's playing. And what I mean by this is you end up studying the entire meta to some degree. Or within seeing a couple cards, you have to then guess what's in the rest of their deck. So that's more for the reactive control players, that you need to know what you're stopping when you're stopping it. For proactive or tap-out control, it's a little different. You don't have the same issue with there being as much reaction, having to wait and see what they're doing to react to it. Because proactive control, the way it works, is you play persistent effects, such as enchantments or artifacts, Ensnaring Bridge, Ghostly Prison being 2 of the bigger ones. And you slow down your opponent from doing stuff just through these persistent effects. Now, the issue with this style of control, it can work, it will work, but if you don't get the right pieces at the right time or the right answer at the right time, just like reactive control, it falls apart. Or you can establish your lock, which is usually what you're going for. When I say lock is stopping your opponent from doing stuff that you don't want them to do. If you can't get to a win con fast enough, they usually can figure out a way to slide out of it. It sucks, it happens. That's just the facts of the game. Now, the counterpart to control is aggro. Aggro decks are aggressive decks. Aggro is short form for that. You generally are using creatures that are mana efficient, So low cost with high power effects to hit them as fast as you can. Now you also will be using a mixture of spells in there. So that's where your mono red aggros and things like that fall into, where you're using 1 and 2 drop creatures to get in super fast, and you're supporting it with things like lightning bolts and other low cost cards that can either clear creatures out of the way or hit them in the face. Don't actually hit your opponent in the face, please. I'm not condoning that. What I'm talking about is throwing spells at their face. Now, aggro decks are probably the most entry-level friendly decks because they're generally more consistent in the fact that you don't need as many fragile components or as much of the right card at the right time as some of the other decks need in order to function. Which is why, statistically, if you ever watch Pro Tours, over multiple day events, aggro decks have a higher win percentage on day 2 and so on because mental fatigue sets in with the other styles of decks. Now, some of the downsides or things that I think most players that play aggro when they first start need to learn is when to hold back. Because if you have 2, 3, 4 creatures out and they're not able to respond and you're winning, great. Don't overextend. Because when you overextend, that's where you get into the issues of a board wipe can suddenly set you completely out of the game because you have no way to recoup your board. That's where aggro decks are usually fragile. If you run into an attrition game where they have enough removal, you can't come back because you usually are giving up card draw to have extremely aggressive gameplay. Now, that being said, aggro is where I started. I've gone over to control more lately, but it's where I recommend most people start because there's a lot of things you can do within the aggro hub. There's even aggro control and all these kinds of things you can get into later on. Like I said, no one deck is one archetype. Next most commonly played deck is mid-range. Mid-range is those green stompy kind of decks. Or those decks where you're playing lots of early game mana ramp to be able to play 4, 5, and 6 drop creatures, and you're winning not like an aggro deck on turn 3, 4, or 5, where you're potentially hitting lethal. You're probably winning closer to 5, 6, 7 for your lethal ranges because early game you're denying people resources potentially to buy you time to play big stuff, or like I said, you're using ramp like Land of War Elves or Giant Growth. Man, I'm drawing a blank on that. That sucks. Now, you're using those early game effects to go get your lands out of your deck or be able to play faster. Or maybe you're cheating stuff out because you're able to discard it early game and reanimate it out later. That's more of a combo thing than a mid-range thing. But it happens in both. Like I said, things happen in both. So through these effects, you're going to be able to play your big creatures and win that way. Or you're slowing down their early game and still winning with an aggro strategy like creatures, but you're buying time early game to get there. So that's more the mid-range strategies. These decks are also still fragile to the board wipes and the severe attrition games, though they do play well into attrition. If there's a creature removal heavy deck you're playing against, things like that. But these are the common issues you'll have with aggro and mid-range decks. Now, the last deck I want to talk about is combo. Combos are fun. Combos are considered degenerate by a lot of players because usually combo decks you're not interacting a lot with your opponent, and then suddenly out of nowhere you win. Combo decks, what you're doing is relying on 2 or more cards that effects combine in a certain way to get you the win or get you into a position to win easily from. So in Modern, currently one of the more common combo decks to see is Storm, where you end up playing a whole bunch of low mana draw card effects and things like that to play a ton of spells to build up what's called a storm count. To use one spell to kill your opponent with just one massive giant spell. You really don't interact a lot with your opponent. You essentially sit there playing with yourself until you win. So not a lot of fun, But it depends. It comes down to the player again. The other really common, in Modern at least, combo deck is Ad Nauseam. Ad Nauseam, what you're doing is trying to draw your entire deck in one turn and essentially throw it at your opponent. You do this through an effect of Ad Nauseam, where you get to reveal cards from the top of your library until you decide to stop, and you lose life for each card converted mana cost that you reveal. But then you play things that say, if you hit 0, you don't lose this turn, or you don't lose the game this turn. Things like that. So those two in combination, you can suddenly just draw through your entire deck and throw it at someone. So those are the 4 major archetypes of Magic. Like I said multiple times already through this video, no one deck is usually just one of these archetypes. There's aggro control, which is, red creatures coming in to beat your opponent, and you're using your burn spells to clear the way, killing their creatures, so you can get in there and smash them fast. There's combo control, which is you control using, your reactive effects or killing off things to buy time until you get your combo, and then you just combo off and win. You also have, mid-range like Death and Taxes, which is control in the early game, but you still win with a creature aggro strategy. So, regardless of what deck you find, if you find you have fun with it, play it. If you want to be a degenerate, like I am with Prison, play Prison. Really, when it comes down to it, Magic's all about having fun and experimenting. So, play the decks you want to play. Build within whatever archetypes you want to build in. The thing is to just have fun. So, there you have it. That's the major archetypes of Magic. Please like and subscribe to this channel. It's an easy way to support us, and I can keep this content coming that way. You can always come and visit us in store. We have 2 stores, one in Markham, one in Toronto. And you can follow our blogs at threekingdomsgames.com, as well as follow us on all major social media. And that's in the description box down below. I'll see you next time.